Hi, I'm JJ, and you're listening to Microphone Munchies. Food for thought, they'll get you hungry for more. So, happy Thursday, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all safe, and I hope that as best as you can or have had, you've had a good week. I wasn't going to talk about this originally, I had other plans, but of course, with what's happening in the world, I cannot turn a blind eye myself. And it's one of those things where, honestly, I'll say this as a disclaimer, I suppose, but I want to make it very clear that I don't have all the answers. I'm just some random person, and there are so many things that I cannot speak for. For example, I cannot represent every Asian in the world. I mean, there's I think 4.7 billion of us in the world right now. I'm also not a woman. So, with what's happening, or what happened, recently with the shootings, the murders, the killings in Atlanta, in the United States on Tuesday, there is a very strong element of, well, it's not just anti-Asian violence, but it's anti-Asian, and especially anti-Asian women. And so that's part of the experience I cannot speak to. I also live in Canada, so I don't know what it's like to live in the United States. And I mean, there are so many things, but I just want to say that I want to make this really clear. And also, before I begin with any of this, I actually want to make it very clear that when it comes to things like hate crime or racism or oppression, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not mutually exclusive. And why do I want to say this? Because it's very easy for people to, and I do it myself, I'll be honest, is to get into this feeling of the oppression Olympics, where we think we cannot, why should we care about them if they didn't care about us? And it's very easy to get into this cycle of hate, cycle of hatred. And I know this is a strange example, but from watching anime all my whole life, especially any sort of Gundam anime, or any anime with any sort of fighting in it, the cycle of hatred, it never works. Okay, if anyone's watching Attack on Titan right now, you definitely know. And so it's important to mention those things. It's oppression is not a zero-sum game. I cannot speak for everyone. For all of these things I'm going to say in my podcast today are my opinions based on research, based on some of the sources that I've consulted. But for all I know, I could be very wrong. The purpose of today's podcast, I want to talk a little bit about what happened. I want to put this into maybe some context for those of you who might not be Asian or might not be Asian American or living in North America. I want to bring it to a Canadian context because that's the one that's important and relevant to me as a person, as an Asian person living in Toronto with family members in Vancouver. And I don't know, to be very honest. This is one of those things, this podcast is one of those things where honestly, my natural instinct is to not say anything. I don't know if this is a defense mechanism. I'm not sure if this was just how I was raised, but it seems to me like many people, a lot of Asian people, especially in the Americas, the North American, South American, and the Caribbean, were taught to internalize the pain as to not so that we don't disturb the harmony or that we don't impose the pain on others. And it's a very tragic thing. Actually, we see this all throughout a lot of places, but suicide rates are pretty high, for example, not just in the Americas, but throughout, I know in Japan and Korea and in China, actually, for young people, especially with all the pressures and stuff, we're told from a young age that all we need to do is shut up and work hard. And then if things don't work out, just shut up and work harder. And while that is, it can be, it develops a work ethic, it also develops a lot of self-hatred, and it can develop a lot of unprocessed, a lot of internalized, it's like, and then you bottle it all up, and one day it explodes, and you have no idea where it comes from. So I'm making this podcast even though I don't want to. To be very honest with you, I don't want to make this podcast because it's one of those things where maybe for some of you this is new. Maybe for some of you, some of the things that I'll talk about or touch upon are, whoa, didn't think about it like that, and that's good. That's part of the point. But at the same time, not at the same time, not but, just it's my reality, I suppose. It's something that I've known my whole life because this is what we were taught, and I'm saying this knowing full well that I also have privilege, a lot of privilege, because, for example, those who were killed, they worked in spas, and so they had to be in contact with people. Whereas for me, I can teach online. I'm a teacher, but I can teach online, so I have the privilege, I suppose, of avoiding people during this COVID pandemic time. And as a guy, as a man who is not elderly either, I'm not really I don't think that I'm probably the best, not best, that's not the right word. Like, I'm not the prime target, I suppose, for any sort of hate crime. And I'm also very lucky. I live in an area in Toronto that's fairly, like, I don't know, it's an area where I am not witness to that much crime. But I know this is not the same or not the case for everyone. I know this is not the same or not the case for different places, different people. And there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to talk about. So I'm going to try my best. And I promise you that I'm going to try my best to be as honest as possible. And every second of this, like even at this very moment, my brain is telling me, stop talking. Just, it's not important. Nobody cares. And your pain doesn't matter. These ideas don't matter. And I have to say, no, it does. It does matter. And for all of those of you who are listening who have maybe these similar thoughts or this similar pain, or this thing, especially if you're listening to this or watching this and you're Asian, I want to say you're not alone. And I want to say it's okay to feel whatever you feel. I'm really grateful, actually, that when I'm looking at things on social media, for example, or reading things online, a lot of the content creators, especially those who are in the activist space, especially the Asian ones, a lot of them mention that if you're Asian, just turn off the phone and just grieve in whatever way you need to. And, in my case, it's to dance, to make this podcast, and to talk to my family. So yeah, let's get right into it. So what happened on Tuesday evening, long story short, in Atlanta, you can find this, you can go research this yourself or look at the news. 8 people were shot by a gunman. Calling a spade for what a spade is, it's a hate crime, and he's a white terrorist. And 8 people were killed. 6 of them were of Asian descent. Of all the people who were killed, I have some of their names, and forgive me, I might mispronounce their names. I'll try my best. And to our knowledge at the moment, these were the people who were killed. Delana Ashley Yon, Xiaojie Tan, Daoyo Feng, Paul Andre Mitchells, Julie Park, and Hyunjung Park. And one thing I want to highlight is that all three businesses were Asian-run spas, and six of the victims who were killed were Asian women. And so, I mean, and these businesses weren't even anywhere near each other. I mean, two of them were near each other, but this is, you know. And then thinking back to what the police or the sheriff or a captain or whatever, one of the police who was trying to explain this case, he was saying some stuff about, oh, the gunman, the murderer, the gunman guy, he had sexual addiction problems, or he was having a bad day or whatever. And this is completely not the point. And also, upon further investigation, it was revealed that this policeman, who his comments were, if anything, supportive of the gunman, well, he actually has a history of anti-Asian posts on Facebook. Like, for example, there was an image where he promoted this T-shirt that basically said COVID-19 is a virus that was imported from China. And, you know, it's quite obvious if you're, four of the women who were killed were Korean. It's got nothing to do with China, nothing at all. But of course, it's all lumped together because a lot of people see other groups as monoliths. We all do. It's human nature, maybe. I do the same thing, unfortunately. I'm not any better than another person. For example, in football, I love my team. I think that anyone who supports my team is a good person. But they're not. Not all of them are. There's another team I don't like. I think all the people who support that team, they're idiots. But they're not. They're just people. But it's very easy. It's a heuristic shortcut. It's very easy for humans, for us to want to make life easier. And so instead of seeing people as individuals, we like to group people. Now, this can be good and bad. But the key thing here is, what can we do about it? Why is this important to recognize? And then from then on, what can we do about it? Because this incident is not isolated. It exists in a context. It exists in a context of anti-Asian rhetoric, anti-Asian laws, policies, histories, and it's tied actually to the struggles of many different groups. And it does actually have links. It has actually really strong links, especially in the North American context, with anti-blackness as well. And so it is all entangled together, and it's a very big mess. And I can't give you all the answers, unfortunately. It's fascinating to read about, but it's really important because in life, for example, if someone's mad at you, right, you need to understand why they're mad and the reasons. You need to understand the context, or else you'll never figure out how to solve or how to make things better. If there's a problem and you don't understand the context, you'll never solve the problem. And so here, a big thing that I hope I can help contribute to the conversation is that to say this is just some tragedy and an isolated incident, or that it so happened it's just because of COVID, it is completely missing the point. Because by doing something like that, in my opinion, I think that it is too easy to just say, okay, we dealt with it. Now let's go back to life as normal. But the problem is life as normal was never that great to begin with, because life as normal has a lot of these racial biases, these there's a lot here. Okay, we'll go through it one step at a time, because otherwise my head will explode. So let's talk about this here. Of course, COVID-19 definitely has a factor. I'm not gonna lie about that. I'm not gonna say it doesn't. Let's start there, and then let's go back. So since COVID-19, from March 20 to February 2021, 3,795 reported anti-Asian incidents occurred. 64% were women. This is in, I believe this is in the U.S. context. It might be U.S. and Canada. But the main underlying thing is that hate crimes against people of Asian descent have risen. And it's not just people of Chinese descent, because obviously racists, bigots, and people with a lot of hatred in their hearts, they can't tell the difference. So even though Asia is, like I said, 4.7 billion people, 59.6% of all people on Earth are Asian. And we're not all one, right? I mean, even within somewhere like, I'm from Hong Kong. I've lived in Taiwan and Beijing. Everywhere is different. China itself officially has 56 different ethnic minorities. So, pretty interesting, but cool. There's all sorts of different people, right? And when we think of Asian, a lot of times we don't think about, well, what about people like, like we don't usually, unfortunately, I don't know if we is the right word, but some people don't categorize people from the Indian subcontinent as Asian, right? They'll say, oh no, Asian. What does that even mean? And yet, unfortunately, all these groups, we all suffer in different ways, and not all Asians are successful. Not all Asians are X, Y, or Z. And that is a very important distinction, important nuance. Let's keep going. I'm going to bring this into the Canadian context, specifically because I think this matters a lot here. In Canada, we constantly have this feeling of it's not happening here. It's just in the US. And I really want to emphasize that it's not just the US. So here we go. Actually, and this is kind of sad, but in Canada, there's actually more anti-Asian racist incidents per Asian capita than in the US, with British Columbia being the most in North America, specifically Vancouver. Vancouver, in 1 year from 2019 to 2020, had, according to Statistics Canada, an increase in 717% of hate crimes against Asians, or people of Asian descent, Asian Canadians. Of this group, according to Statistics Canada, 30% who were either attacked or reported these attacks were Chinese, 27% were Korean, and 19% identified as Southeast Asian. And here's the thing I really want to capitalize on, and this is not my information. You can check this out. This is from a group called Project 1907, and I'm just going to read some of this stuff. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not just because of COVID. If any of you, the reason why I want to emphasize that is because if you think it's just because of COVID, many people will assume that once COVID is over, once vaccines roll out, once we can travel again, once things go back to normal, then this is no longer a problem. But it is. The only thing about COVID is that it's made it more evident because people are more glued to their phones. So we see these things happen. That's it. But in our normal day-to-day life, maybe we're too busy with work, with school, with our kids, with our own lives, and we don't care. So really important. It's not just COVID. In fact, Asians, at least in Canada, have been in Canada since 1788, And it's the first Chinese laborers were shipped to, and forgive me, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Nu Cha Nult territory in 1788 as an experiment. And here are some things. I'm taking this all from Project 1907. You can read it yourself. You can just Google it. Here are some things that it's important within the context of Asian Canadians specifically. The role of Chinese Canadians in building the CPR, the Canadian Pacific Railway. So especially in the west of Canada, in British Columbia and Alberta, Chinese Canadians built that. They didn't build it because they wanted to necessarily, and they didn't build it just because they were good at it. I mean, they built it because there was no other option. Many of them had escaped or fled here, basically, because there was no opportunity in China. So they were here, and they were willing to work for dirt cheap labor because there was no other choice. I mean, no one else wanted these dangerous jobs, and a lot of them died. And let me continue. The Chinese Immigration Act of 1885 and the Chinese Head Tax, the Chinese Immigration Act of 1923 and Humiliation Day, DRC Island, or BC's racist leper colony, the Continuous Journey Regulation, Komagata Maru, or the Komagata Maru Incident, the British Honduras Scheme, the anti-Asian riots of 1886 and 1907, and Japanese-Canadian dispossession and internment and incarceration. Just some examples. And of course, this doesn't cover the examples around the Americas and, for example, even places like in the Caribbean and in South America. I mean, for example, one thing that I'm continuously learning about within the diasporas in South America and the Caribbean was the fact that after the abolishment of slavery, for many of these countries before 1886, Cuba and Brazil were the last ones, I believe, in 1886. But before that, after the abolishment of slavery, many of these countries had to rely on, they had to find labor. It's not like once slavery was abolished, the plantations disappeared. They wanted to make money. So they got cheap labor from Asia, from different populations in Asia, from Indians, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipinos, from all different places. Obviously, they lumped them all together. They called them, in the derogatory way, the term that we know them in history this is known as the coolie trade. And it's not a very nice part of history, of course, but it's a very important part to recognize that, even in the very beginning, the people didn't come, they didn't come here with the intention to do harm. They came just like everyone else who comes or goes to any country, to move to any country, we're all human, right? So it's for our families. It's to have a better life, a better future for our kids, for the people we love, and to try to make a new home. And they weren't here to invade or anything. The Asians who were brought over for this. In fact, many of them just wanted to make some money and go back. But a lot of them, they were tricked, for lack of a better word. And they were paid really low wages, had really terrible jobs, and some of them weren't even allowed to go back. And while they were here, because they worked for so low wages, many people in those communities that they were part of resented them because they always got the jobs, because they were willing to work for nothing. And so people said they're stealing the jobs. And this was back in the 1800s. So this is over 200 years of the same stuff. It's not new. None of this is new. The concept of people assuming that Asians are dirty, ridiculous. I mean, we take off if you don't take off your shoe before you come in, mom's gonna beat you, you know? And as you know, any Asian will tell you, growing up, we're not allowed to, you cannot sleep on your bed unless you're taking a shower or change into home clothes. Yeah. So it's ridiculous. But of course, there are many stereotypes, many sorts of things. You could see it in the, for example, in the Americas, the desexualization of Asian men and the hypersexualization of Asian women. And well, we'll get to it. I'll talk about that as well. But first, I want to discuss some things. Number one of the very, really, really hateful things is the minority myth. Or sorry, the model minority myth. What on earth am I talking about? Well, the model minority myth is this concept. I actually never heard of this until I moved here. I mean, I grew up in Asia. I grew up 18 years in Asia. And in Asia, I'm just another Asian. Like, you know, there's a lot of people. And some of them look like me. I've never heard of this model minority thing because when I was living in Asia, I was definitely not a minority. So I moved here, and the model minority is this concept. To my knowledge, I might be wrong because I didn't grow up here. The model minority is a concept that some people like to use Asians, and I say Asians with big air quotes or an asterisk, because when they're saying Asians, oftentimes what people are referring to is they're only referring to East Asians, and specifically people of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean descent. And they're not talking about all the other different groups like Lao people, Cambodians, Thai, Vietnamese, Indians, people from Philippines. They're not always using these groups, and I found that quite interesting. And it's very, it's just bad. Like it's very generalizing. Generalizing. But anyway, I'll talk about that. So the model minority myth is basically, to my understanding, is the concept that these groups, they succeeded because they worked hard, and that actually there is a fair playing field. And if you just work hard and pull yourself by your bootstraps or tighten your belt or something, then you will achieve success. And the only reason why you don't achieve success if you're not white is because you are lazy, or you didn't work hard enough, or you're not smart enough, or blah, 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 blah. And this is a very, 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 very bad. It's a very terrible, terrible thing, because the first part of it is not even true. It's a myth. And the second part is, what it ends up doing is there's a concept: united we stand, divided we fall. If we're fighting against something, or if we're dealing with things like white supremacy, if we're dealing with things like oppression, then these are systemic things. These are institutionalized things. It's not like you can't. There's no final boss where if we just punch them, then we win. No, this is like it's encoded in the law, and it's encoded in the culture, and it's something that we all have to face every single day, all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean even if you benefit from this, even if you are white, then this is something we all have to face, because I mean, you really don't know what could happen. So why is this so harmful? Well, other than the fact that it's a myth, it's harmful because it ends up pitting people against each other in a way that has nothing to do with the problems or solutions, but instead just causes greater divide and greater hate among people who, if you've ever been hurt, it's very easy for your first instinct to go out and hurt someone else. And a lot of people are hurting. And a lot of people have been hurt from many, many different circumstances. And I mean, like, imagine this. If 5 people from 5 different groups, different ethnicities, or different countries, or different religions, whatever, let's say they all lost a loved one. Let's say they all lost their mom. How can you judge which one is in more pain? Which person is in more pain? That doesn't make any sense. And just because one person is hurting doesn't mean that the other people are not allowed to hurt. Doesn't make sense. It's not zero sum. It's not mutually exclusive. And that's really key, because the model minority myth makes it seem like some people are having it good. And while there are always individual examples of people who succeed, they're not succeeding because the system is fair. They're succeeding in spite of it. And so, I'm just going to read what Project 1907 says, because they're much smarter than me. The model minority myth is rooted actually in anti-blackness. It erases the systemic or systematic racism we face, instead weaponizing our well-being to oppress others and prop up white supremacy. It prevents solidarity and cross-racial movement building. We must fight this myth. This myth can also be used by those of us who, quote-unquote, have attained success. When we look at other groups, we sometimes like to tell ourselves, no, we did it because we worked hard. They don't do it because they're lazy. And we don't see, well, we just fell into the same trap. We're using the exact same, we're using the system of oppression on ourselves onto others. We're basically saying, look, we got punched in the face, but I can't punch them back, so I'm going to punch someone weaker than me, or I'm going to punch someone who won't be able to hit me back. And honestly, like, just think about back in school. That's exactly what bullies do, right? Bullies never fight another bully that looks strong. Bullies don't usually fight the teacher. Bullies always try to look for the weakest person, because deep down they're weak themselves, but they can't face themselves. And so they try to take that anger out on someone else. And a lot of times when you look at people who bully others in their family history, they might be bullied in their home. And so you have this cycle of hatred. And so this is really important, at least for me personally. I'm very biased. I really think that in a lot of these things, breaking the cycle of hatred is really important. I'm not going to lie. My instinct to all of this is I'm thinking, well, maybe if someone hits me, I'm going to hit them back. And who cares? But this is not really going to get us anywhere. This is not really going to solve the problem. It will satisfy my ego, because if I get punched, I can punch back. But it's not going to make lasting change, because then maybe someone else will take revenge. If not on me, on my family or my friends or just random people. And we're seeing that with anti-Asian violence. Most of the victims are women and the elderly. And on that note, actually, I will say, maybe it's just been the people that I've been looking at or reading from, but I want to, especially in this issue, when we're talking about the violence against Asian American women, listen to Asian American women's voices especially. While the Asian American men are Asian, we are men, and we don't experience the same kinds of things. I will never understand what it's like to be in my mom's shoes, in my sister's shoes. I don't understand it. And I think that women are much better at understanding the long game, the long-term fix to the problem. Not the short-term ego boost. Not the short-term, you hit me, well, I hit you twice. It's not going to fix the problem. And so I do encourage all of you to listen to women's voices. In fact, over here, there is one, I was just looking online earlier, and this is reshared from two accounts on Instagram. One's called Diet Prada, and another person, her name is Christine Liwag Dixon, and they're talking about how the media's depiction of Asian women harms them. So Christine Liwag Dixon, she mentions this. She says this. I'm just reading her quotes or her tweets. I quote, "The hypersexualization of Asian women plays a huge part in the violence we face. I've been cornered on the street as men say, 'Me love you long time.' I've been offered money for a happy ending massage. I've been hit on because I'm Asian and told it's a compliment. Asian women are so often seen and treated as objects, as trophies, and this very real problem is often seen as a punchline. For example, jokes about mail order brides, the portrayal of Asian women in Hollywood. And Asian women are murdered because of it. So all of this stuff, every time, we see, and this is something I had to learn myself, every time we see something that, oh, it's just a joke, yo, just take it easy. No, I mean, acknowledge it. It's these kind of things that make it seem normal for people to just assume that, they're not people, they're just Asian. It's very easy to think that way. In fact, sometimes I think about it. If I were born in this society and I was white, and all my life I was taught all this stuff, that Asians were, in the movies you see on Hollywood, that Asians were all like that. That all they ever did was, what do Asians do in the movie? They do kung fu or IT, or they have no, like, the Asian guys are never sexy, and the Asian women are never kick ass. Well, if I were in a society like this and I was taught like this from a young age, what would I believe? This is really cool too. It reminds me of, in psychology, Stanley Milgram, the Stanley Milgram experiments, where basically he showed that people, surprisingly, we just listen to authority. We all like to think that we will not become a monster. But when the environment is in place, we often do, even if we don't want to. And the cool thing about the Milgram experiments, which you can read upon, the cool thing about all of this is I always try to remind myself that babies are not born and say, one day I'm going to go and shoot people up. There is experiences, there's environment, there is so many things that shape this. And while we cannot, the danger of saying that this is an individual person's problem is that it's very easy to overlook the systematic stuff, the environment stuff that actually makes this problem even worse. Think about it this way. Have you ever been in an environment where it was very loud and you couldn't study? And then suddenly you went somewhere quiet and you could study? Did you suddenly become smarter? No. You're the same person. The only difference is because of the environment. The behavior that made sense to you changed. You know what it's like. Sometimes at home, you're a certain way. But when you're with your friends, at least for me, when I'm with my friends, when I'm watching football, when I'm playing Xbox, I become really stupid. Because the environment. It's all just for fun. But when I'm at home, I don't talk. I don't shout. I just read books. So it's really interesting and really important. That environment aspect is super, super key. Again, racism is not a zero-sum game. I'm reading from Project 1907. Acknowledging and discussing anti-Asian racism does not negate other forms of racism. It does not erase the harms that we have inflicted on other communities. And we have. Asian people are not perfect. We've done terrible, terrible, terrible things. And not all Asian people are the same. There are plenty of Asian people. Look, there's 4.7 billion. So there are plenty of people who disagree with everything I'm saying, which is perfect. Again, I quote, "Participation in the oppression Olympics stems from an internalization of the model minority myth, and it serves the same white supremacy that oppresses us all." So yeah, this is way longer than I want it to be, but these are just some ideas. I hope that some of these things have helped. I mean, at the very least, if it makes you think a little and have a little more compassion for others, I think that would be great. Talk to a friend. I don't know, reach out to someone you love. Tell them you love them. Yeah. I don't really have too much to say or too much else to say at this moment. But it is an important issue, specifically not just against Asians, but specifically against Asian women. And it is so tied up in so many different things, right? Because you could argue, there's a geopolitical aspect about it. There's a lot of things. Some people see it as, retaliation. There's so much. I can't go into right now, or else my brain will actually disintegrate in front of you. But yeah, those are some of my thoughts. Please, if you want, go read up about some of it yourself. And besides that, please love yourself, love the people around you, and I hope you have a good weekend, regardless. And yeah, I'll see you next week. That's JJ out.